Derek, what's up, man? Thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, my pleasure. Let's help some people.
Yeah. Dude, so I've been following you for a little while on Instagram, and so that ADU guy, as you know, people may not know, or this is kind of a revolution more in California recently in the past few years that people have jumped on the bandwagon. But tell us a little bit about your backstory, what ADUs are, and what you're doing with them currently.
Yeah, for sure. So an ADU is an accessory dwelling unit. Just think a secondary or tertiary legal dwelling that's on a lot that was primarily designated for a single family house. So not to be confused with apartments or a multifamily dwelling in a multifamily zone. The cool thing about this strategy is we can buy high desired, lower density areas and add legal conforming units, either attached or detached to these properties. So my backstory of the ADU journey started in 1996 when I was a delinquent high school kid, and our high school woodshop teacher handpicked a group of us that weren't going to go to college. He could see the writing on the wall, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to start a class called Construction Technology, and we're going to build an illegal ADU for another one of our teachers." And I was like, "I'm in." Anyways, I was just lucky enough to be in this little Southern Oregon town where we had a legal option to build an accessory residential unit. We'll get into it in a minute, but as legislation really starts to catch up with some of these best practices, I was just lucky enough to be in an area that allowed them. So that's how I've been into the ADU scene. I got my contractor license right after high school. Kind of have always been building, sidetracked into a career as a fireman EMT, and I did both for years until I left the fire service and just pursue accessory dwelling unit development and holding full time.
Nice, man. Sounds like my story, dude. I used to be a fireman as well in Southern California and left actually last year. Um, but so going back to, the story on ADUs and building those in Oregon's had those, as you noted, for quite some time. This is more of a new venture and avenue for a lot of investors in California. Some areas will call it, granny flat, casita, mother-in-law's quarters. But so you guys, I think there's a book too of either a guy in Washington or Oregon that wrote, about AUs a long time ago. And so tell me the backstory on, like, when you get these properties, when you first started buying them, were you buying them strictly for, hey, I can put an ADU on here? Or at first, was it just buy and hold whatever you can get?
Yeah, great question. The very first house that I bought, my first investment property, was just a single family house. To this day in my portfolio, it's the only house that I own that doesn't have an accessory dwelling unit on it. But shortly thereafter, I quickly pivoted into only buying properties that have A, infill potential, and B, hopefully land banking to even split the lot more. So as we increase densities nationwide, as we look at better, looser zoning regulations, I'm always buying properties that have room to add ADUs and or split properties to build new primaries with ADUs as well. And
How
yeah,
hard is it?
the book you referred to, a friend of mine, Cole Peterson, he's a Portland guy. He wrote the
Yeah.
book Backdoor Revolution. Half of the book is kind of for builders. The other half is kind of for policymakers, but it's a great piece of writing if you're interested in this strategy and you kind of want some of the history and the backstory. He's a brilliant dude. He has a master's degree from Harvard in urban planning, has built a few ADUs himself, lives up in Portland, and like I said, is a friend of mine. Good resource to
Yeah.
have.
Yeah, definitely good resource. So when you're splitting a lot, how easy is that? I mean, there's a piece of, or a bill that went through and was passed, SB 9 for California, that you can split lots, but you can't build an ADU, split the lot, then all of a sudden sell the ADU. You can't do that here. So what's, for you guys, how long has that been, an Oregon thing and or bill or, zoning it piece? And then also, how do you use that to your advantage?
Yeah, we just recently passed legislation similar to California, similar to Washington. I think we were the first to have it on the books for a first reading. When I say split a lot, just to be clear, I'm buying single family properties, remodeling the house, building an ADU or two, splitting the lot, and then building another primary house on a separate tax lot of record with a couple of ADUs, not to be confused with SB9 or condoization or fee simple lot partitioning for the ADU yet. Right now, that's
Got
a
it.
strategy. We can already do it in all three of those states with condo law. But what SB9 is specifically trying to allow is the ability to make a smaller lot with a smaller footprint and a smaller house and be able to sell off that ADU on a fee simple tax lot, as opposed to with condo law. And although it's in state law, cities still haven't really implemented it. I know a couple of ADU developers in Southern California that are in process that are almost done, but there's
Mhm.
all these regulations, common sewer, different easements, different access. Do they need to require sprinklers? There's all these problems that weren't sorted out before the bill passed. So just because SB9 is law in California and you can do this JADU, ADU, and then split it off and sell one, doesn't mean that anybody's fully completed it. To my knowledge, I know a couple people that are almost done. With
Mhm.
all that being said, the national model code and what in my opinion, what I see coming soon to most coastal cities where housing is at a shortage and there's a crisis is there's going to be a clear process. It's going to go through the mud for a while, but eventually it will come out as a clear process on how to take a minimum lot size zone property in your area and be able to cut that in half or into thirds to again break off. The idea and the intent is to break off smaller pieces of land with smaller houses, and just by sheer size they're more affordable. So that's the overall idea. The advantage, how I would use it to my advantage to answer your question, um, would be to probably pass on that strategy. My goal is long-term build and hold workforce housing. I don't want to sell anything. I don't want more tax lots because that's just another tax bill, which reduces the cash flow. But what some
Mhm.
investors are doing currently in Oregon, California, and especially Seattle, some of the best models are in Seattle where values are so high. Buy a single family house for 500, build an ADU in the backyard for 300, condo it off, and that ADU is now worth 750 as a standalone saleable asset. So
Got
investors
it.
are using these to their advantage when they can force a ton of equity and then exit. If you're going to
Got it.
hold it, you wouldn't want to split that lot until right before you sold it, because why would you want all this taxation value coming in the door when you're trying to make cash flow?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, that's so there's one guy that is in LA and he's doing kind of the same thing. He is, buying it. He'll end up, building ADU, actually adding square footage to that first front property, and then build the ADU where he'll get even more value. Because for us down here, just because it's so new, we don't get the valuations as you guys probably do up there because ADUs have been around for so long. So appraisers know how to kind of go through and get through the fog when it comes to, does this actually pan out on, it was 500, now it's 700 because you built the ADU or whatever that may be. I've seen a lot of struggle because it's so fresh that they'll just say, hey, we get you an extra little bit of square footage, but we can't give you the full value.
Yeah, that happens in areas that don't have as many what I would call the gold standard for appraisal, which is comparable sales.
Hmm.
But that's changing as well, nationwide and in California. And I'd say one thing to avoid potentially on that same note is a lot of people over design, overbuild, and therefore overspend on their ADUs, and they're bummed out when they get maybe 75% value back if they're trying to burr their money out. For those of you listening that don't understand that, that just means if you're going to use some sort of financial stack to build it, but at the end of that, you're going to have to do a cash out refinance of some kind to pay yourself back and use leverage. You're not getting maybe a 1-for-1 return on your dollar. I always tell people if you can plan, design, and build an affordable ADU that's 75% ish to the standard rate of square foot price in your neighborhood, you're not going to leave any money in the deal. And another side trick that I usually share with people is get a plan set, either of a conversion of the existing house or an extension of the existing house, a conversion of the garage there, or a new standalone, whatever it is. Get
Hmm.
a rough set of plans, you get a set of blueprints, and take those to a local respected appraiser in your market that has some experience and offer to pay them for their time. Hey, for $500, can you give me a value of this ADU at this address in 6 months? And that's probably the most foolproof way people can not be surprised by what I'm hearing all the time is my ADU was undervalued. And most of the time when I get calls about this, I say, send me your plans, and I look at the plans, and they have a $500 a square foot ADU in a $350 a square foot neighborhood, and they don't understand why it didn't get value. It's like, because you didn't start with the end in mind.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's, that goes to people that are buying properties and they fix it up to you know, flip comparable property, and then they say, I'm going to rent it out. So they'll put, an extra $50,000, $100,000 of upgrades, and then think they'll get an extra, $2,000 a month out of it, which isn't the case.
Mm-hmm.
When we're looking at rentals, this is, to what your point is like, start with the end in mind. Hey, I'm only going to do, new flooring that is like basic flooring as if it's a rental, and, maybe repaint the cabinets, put knobs on, and do some other upgrades, but I'm going to use it as a rental versus, hey, we're going to come in here, we're going to put shaker cabinets in, we're going to do, high quality vinyl, or, high quality laminate. We're going to do all this other stuff that ultimately you won't get that value back out of it. So to your point, exactly, start with the end in mind, and, see where you're going to go on your numbers too. So that's, another adage to what you said, like, run your numbers appropriately for the area.
Yeah, for sure. Good points, Peter. But the other thing I would probably just piggyback on the end of that is size. Most people call me and they say, Derek, I can build 1,000 square foot ADU. I want 1,000 square footer. And what we found in lots of markets across the country, looking at lots of data as well as personal experience, is that size doesn't always equate to more. So for example, if you can build a 1-bedroom, 1-bath ADU for $200,000 in your market, and it rents for X, if you build a 1,000 square foot, maybe 2-bedroom, 2-bath ADU, is it gonna rent for double? In most markets, it will not. There's a cap. There's a range for a 1-bedroom, and there's a range for a 2-bedroom. To get a local range, I like to use the HUD, like 110% of the HUD area fair market rents. You can look at like Section 8 rental charts and whatnot to see kind of where that return is. It's usually based on bedroom count, not size anyways. So if you're ever between, 1-bedroom, 1-bath at 500 and 800 feet, the 500 square footer is going to rent for almost identical, and it's going to be 30 to 40% less. So don't over design, and then don't build too big.
Got it. Yeah. I think, you're hitting the nail on the head. Like, make sure that you don't overthink it. And a lot of people, put a lot of time and effort. And another thing is like, what's worth your time? Are you going to spend 2 years designing something that ultimately is going to actually reap the benefits of designing it, or, get a lot less than what you put into it? Not only the money, but the time too that you put into it. People are like, yeah. And that's where, the emotion comes from too. Like, hey, I spent, 2 years of my life doing all this, but it's like, well, if you would have spent, 3 months or 4 months, you would have got the same, price point and everything else.
Yeah, for sure. Great point.
So, um, so more on the ADU. So what's your bread and butter, like, what area, in Oregon? And when you see a property, are you partnering with it and with the people? Are you, taking this down on your own? How do you structure the partnership if you do them as well?
Yeah, I am doing everything in for my own portfolio of build and hold in Southern Oregon. So I'm in just a few small towns in Southern Oregon, small municipalities. I try to stay out of county areas. This is a kind of an infill housing strategy, so we're within the cities, right? And I don't partner with folks on land developments. I do consult with people all over the country. I mean, I've done probably 2,000 consultations. So I talk to people from all over the US, even internationally at times. But my partnership outside of my area is just knowledge and intellectual property. A lot of what I do as well is just trying to open source what we're doing here, what works. So sharing best practices, I do ground up builds where I share every step of the way, including costs on the YouTube channel. We give away resources, other people in the country that do what I do, like other developers or other housing advocates. I openly share all their links and information so we can kind of team up to help really bring the ADU strategy out of the closet where it's been and into the mainstream. And like you said, when we opened the show, like it's a really big thing in California. I mean, there's a high percentage of all the permits being pulled in your state right now are ADU related. So I joke and I tell people I've been talking about ADUs for 27 years, and it's only been the last few that people have started to listen
Yeah.
because they're interested in its mainstream. But yeah, no partnerships. There are options where you can take a second position on somebody's deed and I could build out their ADU, or I could fund it and build it for them and have a partnership. There are some companies that are trying that, but my goal is to open source for free as much as I can and share as much as I can of this strategy and what's worked across the country so we can add more needed infill housing and give the tenant a break, put a little bit of downward pressure on rent prices because we're at an affordability ceiling while still making a good return. So I call it
Mm,
capitalism with compassion.
that's good. What's your price per square foot then on build out for ADU?
So I'm building ADUs brand new ground up, underground permits, impact fees, turnkey, handing over the keys to the tenant for around $100 a square foot. And when I
That's
say
nice.
that, a lot of people kind of fall out of their seat. Down in the California, if you're in Southern Cal and you want to have somebody build you a new standalone ADU and say you're going to keep it under that 700-ish cap where you're not paying as many fees, it's probably going to be $300 or $400 a square foot. Um, but again, what I practice is what I preach, which is start with an affordable, simple design, self-manage the project, and do as much of the work as you possibly can yourself. I'm also a licensed general contractor with a lot of years of experience. I've never built manufactured home parks. I don't build apartments. I've done one thing for almost 30 years. So we've become really efficient at it. I don't expect
Hmm.
everybody else to build at $100 a square foot, but it's possible. I mean, I help people all over the country every day that build close to that are hands-on DIYers that spend a lot of time, in the trenches doing it. And then a conversion is about half that price. So as low as $100 a square foot for standalone, as low as $50 a square foot for conversions. And then I would say semi-custom construction, if you want to hire somebody and be hands-off, starts at about $250 a square foot standalone and about $125 a square foot for a conversion. So you're in Southern California, you shop around for bids to convert a 400 square foot 2-car garage into an ADU. I mean, you're probably not going to spend a cent less than $125-ish a square foot. And it just goes up from there. That's the absolute base. I know people that have built
Yeah.
$900 square foot ADUs. But again, build to the neighborhood. If you're up
Yeah.
in, the Hollywood Hills, you're not going to build a $250 square foot ADU. But if you're in, Central California, and the average median price is for a home is 300,000, you better not spend any more than 100,000 on your ADU. So just use common sense.
Yeah. No, great point. And you're right. I mean, my place that I'm building is an hour east of LA, and we're at like $250 per square foot, and we're adding 400 extra square feet onto a 392 square foot garage. So, we had to do a bunch of other stuff to get around a couple other things. Do a survey, and that impacted some of the costs and everything else. But you're right. I mean, and especially if you go into Orange County and LA, you're looking at 300 to 325 easy, and ours isn't quote unquote ground up.
Yeah, yeah. And one thing I'd tell people to remember is that it's not always one for one relevant, but if you're in an area where rates for labor and services are that high, rents are probably really high too. Hence the example in California where everybody's spending, hundreds of dollars a square foot, but up here that 600 square foot ADU might rent for 1,300. Down there it'll probably rent for 2,750. So it a
Mhm.
lot of times is relative to the market.
Yeah. And so for you, what are you looking land and because we talk a lot about, or at least on Bigger Pockets, 1% rule, 2% rule. 2% rule only really mattered when we were in like 9, 10, 11, 12. But 1% rule wise, do you fit within that on when you're purchasing, especially at such low cost for $100 per square foot? Is that something, a rule that you use? And if you don't use it, if you fit today, would it fit in a lot of the stuff that you're buying and the construction costs?
Yeah. I don't use any of those rules. I understand them all and I know they work and they're great tools. I just personally don't. I just know that in the long run, by deploying this strategy, that we're going to be really, really wealthy and add a lot of housing, period. The basic rule of thumb I use is, can I get the primary mortgage on the house bought with leverage to be flat? Can it just break even? The ADU, I'll build with cash usually, and it will easily meet the 1% rule. Usually we'll meet like the 1.75% rule. And then when we do a cash out refi on it, it's an infinite return. So a good example of a deal, I'll buy a lot, I'll build a primary house, and I'll build a standalone ADU. I'll build the house in the ADU with the land all in cost for approximately 50% of the market value. So then when I go to refi that project, I just did one in 90 days. I used an equity line. So there was about a $3,500 closing cost and interest that it took for 90 days to build those two out. I refund myself the money with the rate and term, cash out rate and term only refi, and there's zero money in the deal. And I have two new assets that I can live in or that I can rent out, or a combination of the two. So 1% rule is a slam dunk. Even if you're, building an ADU in California, I do like the term. I do like that tool, but I personally don't use it just because we don't need to.
Yeah. It's more of a newer term. I think there's been some relevancy recently from some investors, just because when times change, especially with interest rates and stuff like that, you kind of go back to rules of thumbs and you
Yeah.
know a basis. So that's why I brought it up to you. I figured that
Yeah.
you'd probably have just a solid system.
Yeah, and I do like it. I think people get confused. Like they're just like, it's the factory number. Like let's hit that 1% rule because we got a cash flow and we got to keep rolling. And they don't realize all the other things that come with real estate and owning real estate and holding real estate, which is, what is my return on time? So when we have an ADU, these are some things people don't know. It's got brand new infrastructure. It's a brand new building in a low density area. We basically have this really high demand, low supply multifamily product in a nice single family neighborhood. So
Hmm.
you may not hit the 1% rule if you're a new investor trying to build your ADU, where you could easily go hit it in Cincinnati, but you also have a way different tenant class. You have a brand new building with no CapEx for 20 years. You have brand new infrastructure. You're not like having to go rotor rooter the pipe or worry about the roof leaking in a big storm. Like all that stuff is eliminated. So don't get stuck in the hamster wheel tools to use like this boutique product. I just tell people that to just be aware that with these diminished returns we're seeing in this market with this product is brand new. So if you're comparing new build single family houses in a track lot build out in Austin to an ADU, that would be a really good example. But usually people are looking at 1970s multifamily in the Midwest and applying the same tools to this boutique product in a beautiful area in a state that a lot of people want to live in. So keep those in mind.
Yeah, I mean, those are valuable, data points when you look at, and that's kind of the same dialogue when people go, "Hey, Derek, I can buy something out in, you know, Missouri or Ohio, and it cash flows $200, $300, $400, whatever that is
Mm-hmm.
today." Or, I can buy something that's not really cash flowing outside of adding value like you're doing. And, maybe negative, especially in my market, unless you add value. Why am I going in this market versus the other market? And it's like, well, Derek can have 5 properties and have a higher net worth or a higher cash flow even if it's not day one, but day, 365, versus buying, 15 or 20 in Ohio. Or so stress, time, like you said, personal time, depending on property management and stuff like that. And that still takes some time as well. And cost of repairs, maintenance, and everything else that you just talked about. Hey, I'm building something brand new. It's a brand new product. I'm not going to really have to haggle with it for the next 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, there's going to be stuff here and there, but you're looking at 1970s that, we're almost 60 years away from that. And you're going to have problems almost on a monthly basis for that comparatively to this.
Yeah, well said. I mean, obviously, there's a reason you've got a podcast. I mean, you know what you're talking about.
Well, so, and I say that more so just because, you get these, you probably get them a lot. Hey, I'm building for $250 per square foot. How are you doing $100 per square foot? Well, as Derek, hey, dude, I've been doing this for 27, almost 30 years. I have a system down. I have a crew. I'm a contractor, all that type of stuff. So then it kind of goes back to the conversation that you just said, like, well, how much is your time worth? You need to hire these professionals, you need to do all this stuff. And you've spent your time, a lot of time, going to school, getting all those credentials to be able to do that, to minimize, what you would be ultimately paying someone else to do. So you've really put that into a, one small box of system, and you're able to develop and deliver a product that's going to, give you cash flow, like you said, infinitely.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's just, I've always just focused on going deep, not wide, and it's definitely working.
So what what would you say, are some barriers for people outside of what we talked about, construction costs, stuff like that? What are some barriers that you've seen? You've talked to, thousands of people and consulted them. So what are some, things that you've seen on that end, on conversations, even outside your market, that you've run into that maybe you can share?
The first would be planning and zoning regulations. So outside of Oregon, Washington, California, Montana, with statewide overarching amazing legislation, there are sprinkled cities all over the country that are ADU friendly, but I would say regulation. A lot of places still that allow ADUs require a residency. So you can build an ADU, but only if you live there can you rent it out. Or you can build an ADU, but you need to have one off-street parking spot for that unit. And a lot of places through urban planning just weren't set up to have any more than 2 spots off street. So there's some ADU deal killers out there. Legislation would be the first. If you're in an area that allows ADUs, say one of those 4 states or one of those cities, they're sprinkled all over the country. Some other factors that trip people up are funding. So where am I going to get the money to do this if I'm a new homeowner and I have very little equity? Another one would be decisiveness. Like there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of decisions to make. Not everybody's good at making decisions. For those of you, and this is one of the biggest tips I'll probably leave today, is look for a property that already has an ADU in an area that legally allows them. I've been building them for almost 30 years, and my prime strategy right now is buy properties that already have them. I can go to the closing table, sign for a 30-year fixed rate money one time and be done. Okay, so look for properties that already have them. But I'd say regulation, funding, decision making, and then the last one would maybe be neighbors. When you start doing infill housing, you're not always very popular. People, not that they dislike you, people just usually don't like change. So if there's been, a big backyard next to them, and then all of a sudden there's, an excavator and 10 people out there working all day, they're not going to be super friendly in the beginning. So a lot of it's just people stuff, human relations.
I mean, that's a huge tip, is go after the ones that are already built, because you're gonna have at least for my area. So let's talk about just what I've seen with other investors and or people that I've talked to. You're gonna buy the property, until appraisals catch up and people are selling them for a lot more. You're gonna buy the property less, than what you could a duplex. Duplexes for us go, if you're in Orange County, around almost a million, probably around a million. But if you buy something with a duplex, or sorry, with an ADU, you're looking at something, $100,000-$200,000 cheaper than that. And, not everybody wants to buy that yet, unless you're an investor or someone that's starting out and they want a house hack and stuff like that. So those are added advantage. So that I'm glad you brought that up. What for people that say like, "Hey, Derek, I don't have the money to do this." What have been some strategies that you've said, "Hey, you can go do this," or have talked to people and they end up figuring out how they could fund the deal without having their own money?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, you don't want it bad enough. If you're in a market where an ADU works and you don't have the money to build it, you haven't tried to find it. I would always ask that person, how many banks have you called? How many times have you asked your local credit union if they'd give you a product that would build this? How many times have you called your rich aunt that has money and asked her if she wanted to partner with you? Have you called your works sponsored plan for 403B or 457 or 401k and asked if you could borrow part of your retirement? Look for a financial plan that will fund the ADU, and then also look for a product on the back end. So a couple of years ago, I would tell everybody to look into a cash out refi if you have some equity. A lot of credit unions will do an 80-20 LTV on a cash out refi. Nowadays, if you weren't asleep for the last few years, you should have a rate around 3, and today rates are pushing 8. So you wouldn't want to take that first, say a $600,000 home, and go add 200,000 and pull out a $600,000 note at 3 and turn it into a 7.5 or 8% note at 9. Look for a fixed rate second. Call local banks, credit unions, places that you already have relationships with. There's a company called Renofi, and I do affiliate marketing with them. I send people their way and say, hey, just vet these people, see if it's something that you'd be interested in. They have a fixed rate 20-year product for ADUs that's pretty good. It's not perfect, but it's probably the best product I've seen for people that have little equity. Another thing I would tell people is like quit worrying about what everybody else is doing. Like play your own goddamn game. Like it doesn't matter how many doors people have. Doesn't matter how quick people are scaling. Like you may need to just go bring more income in on the active side. Go make more money until you can afford it. Like this is not a get rich quick with no money. A lot of times we do need money and we do need some reserves. And even if you can get a gap loan or a construction loan or a 203k loan, if it's an attached ADU, banks are still going to want to see good credit and some reserves. So I get my blood boils when I see all these gurus talking about getting rich in real estate with no money. And the fact that, and there's a couple people out there that can just make money rain. They're just born with that ability. But 99.9% of the people, like you're going to have to put in a lot of hard work and like have some money to get into real estate. Like it's just, don't expect everything that you're seeing on Instagram to come true. Like you got to sometimes make some money and save up. My first ADU took me 3 years to save up for,
Yeah, I mean, 3 years, people think that's an eternity, but then you look at, people with a market change and interest rates going up with, these syndicators and stuff like that, which, I'm not trying to, bash them, but they're handing keys back to the bank and they're putting, these properties, up for sale for, 40% off, 30% off. And they're like, oh yeah, John Smith, scaled their company from 2 units to, 2,000 units in the last 5 years. And it's like, and now they're handing it back to the bank. So like you said, like, you don't be worried about what everybody else is doing. Like either, go out, take, a day to, 3 weeks to call all these banks and get some funding, and, or look at where, maybe you need some more active income, maybe second, start a second job and you use that to pay it off. And, you take out a, line of credit and you use some of that. Like you said, things aren't perfect, but once you get to a point like you are and established, you can really, fund a lot of deals. You're not doing 50 a year, but you're doing a good amount where you're all of a sudden saying like, hey, I'm doing things that are infinite returns.
Yeah, well said, man. And if like in your market, if you could literally do one a year for 3 years, you could retire. Say I'm wrong and it takes you 3 times as long. If you have 3 paid off ADUs in your market in 10 years, you don't ever have to work again. Like, it's a
Yeah.
very, very small game if you do it right. Everybody's just so caught up in like leaning against private jets and driving fast cars, and they just forget that the ultimate goal should be, in my opinion, like, how do we make the most amount of passive income that we get to keep with the least amount of work and things to manage? So it's like, try to have lower leverage, higher equity, and fewer units, and you can really knock it out of the park with these.
Yeah, there's this guy I had on the podcast. He was on the Bigger Pockets podcast too, but man overseas, he had like I think 5 rental properties that are all paid off, and that's all he needs, and he doesn't need anything else, and it covers all his expenses. And he does some like Airbnbs to have a little bit more, quote unquote active income, but that's all. That's all he needed to get to financial freedom. I think
Mhm.
you know I guess we can go on, a tangent for another hour on this, but I think like people get so caught up in hearing, the triples, the grand slams and stuff that people get on Bigger Pockets or wherever, any podcast and or social media. They're like, I need that. And if I don't get that, then I'm done. Like I'm not going to do anymore.
Yeah, yeah. Play your own game is what I would tell people.
Yeah. So, for like when you're looking in the next, on your business side for the next 2, 3 years, how do you structure, your goals and or like your systems to set up to meet those goals? So like let's say, you have goals to buy 5 each year. How do you set those goals up? Do you sit down and write them out, or is it something that you've developed over the 27 years? And then how do you put the systems in place to get there?
Yeah, I wish I had a better answer for that. I'm a builder. I'm a builder at
Yeah.
heart. I'm an artist. I'm a
Yeah.
visionary. Okay, I'm not the back end business person. So I just see a lot of pitches. I'll just use the Ted Williams hitting example that Warren Buffett talks about, and the science of hitting. And I just see a lot of pitches, and when I see a good pitch, I swing at it. Like, that's it. I don't have any huge goals. I had a goal for a lot of years, which was to replace my income at the fire department and leave and become financially free so I could run in the mountains and ski powder every day. And I do that, and I kind of get bored. So I recently went to this event. I would say education is huge. I go to a lot of conferences. I pay for education. Like, school's never out for the pros, right? I mean, I'm still a student of the game. Sometimes I go to big conferences and I speak. Sometimes I buy a ticket and I listen. And I just went to an awesome conference up in Seattle with Thatch for the Springboard to Wealth program. If you guys don't know who Thatch is, he's an amazing investor. He's a legit dude, like in the trenches doing work. And I got super inspired by really a lot of new investors and what they were doing, and it affected my goals. So, like, a direct answer to your question is my goals for 24 that I'm already lining out are to go back on the offense. So I've been playing defense for a while, and I just have a really good life, and it's easy.
Yeah.
But my real long-term goal is to build as much housing as I possibly can while I'm alive, and then give it all away when I die. In order to do that, I'm going to have to keep building. So I'm doing some campaigns right now on direct to seller. I've been doing some door knocking. I've been really pinpointing down into zones where I know my strategy is a home run, and I go directly to them. Like, I'm not looking for good deals. I'm looking for perfect properties that are flat, that have good infrastructure. The transformer up on the power pole, I know, has room for another 200 amp service. Like, little things that nobody would ever think about that I know save thousands of dollars for my strategy. I'm hunting for those. I'm making active offers to purchase those. And then I have plans that are already designed that I'm ready to just take to the city and start the process of development. So that's kind of the systematic approach of my goals. But as far as the business side, I've never used a spreadsheet. I don't track anything besides like pen and paper. Very, very rudimentary. It's all about taking massive action. Like, I could have this huge goal setting retreat that I go to, and I could have Brandon Turner's intention journal, which is awesome, by the way. But if I don't function that way, if I'm more of a right brain thinker, like, none of that stuff is going to help me. So
Hmm.
if our listeners out there are like, I'm not good at setting goals, and I'm not good at organization and keeping track of my day, like, neither am I. I suck at that stuff. What I'm really good at is building houses. So figure out what you're good at. If you're just good at that other side, maybe you're the goal person. Team
Yeah.
up with somebody like me who has opposite skill sets, and you guys can go kill it together. But again, I keep going back to this in my mind. Like, don't judge your insides based on everybody else's outsides. Play your own game. Everybody is better than everybody else in the world at like at least one thing. Figure out what that one thing is, and then use it to go meet your goals.
Yeah, brilliantly put. Because you and I are different personalities. You're gonna, hit with someone that's completely different than the other person, and at the same time, you're gonna attract and also do certain things that aren't what I'm gonna do, and what isn't, what Brandon's not gonna do, and David and all the other people that a ton of people see and look up to. It's like, you need to realize that they're not all you, and you're one person that is completely different, and then just work on your strengths, which I think is a very, very valuable point that a lot of people will kind of push and brush to the side, and they spend a lot of years trying to do something else that really doesn't fit within their box.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. I couldn't agree with you more.
So, well, all right, Derek. So, last couple of questions. Do you have a book outside of the one that we mentioned earlier that you can recommend that's helped you in real estate business, that you've read?
I don't read a lot of books. I could probably count on two hands the books I have read. They're all, I'm pretty picky about what I spend my time doing. I will say currently listening to Winning Friends and Influencing People at Dale Carnegie on Audible.
Yeah.
And that's probably one of the most impactful listens I've had in a while. And I can sum it all up in like one line. The more we can put ourselves in another person's shoes and see life from their point of view, the better we're all going to do. So I would say that book right now.
Yeah, it's a great book. What about, you talk a lot about systems and stuff like that, but is there one online app or resource that you're using that's really helping out, be more efficient in business?
No, not a single one. Like I need all of them.
Yeah.
Like, no, like I have no efficiencies in my business. I have an assistant that does most of the stuff that I can't stomach. But I mean, if I turn I almost want to do it so people think I'm not full of shit. Like if I turn my computer around and you saw my desk and my little studio here, you'd be like, this guy's a mess. Like I'd never do a deal with him. But again, like my systems are different. Like when we get on the job site and we go from cutting a pad to putting forms in to raising walls, like my systems are immaculate and they're foolproof and they're tried and tested with decades of proof. Inside the office, I don't have those. Some things that I am looking forward to are just delegating a few more things to an assistant. And eventually I think that will all be virtual. But again, my interest isn't there. My skill set isn't there. So I just go focus on what I'm good at. And then, if you can partner with or pay somebody to clean up kind of the trail behind you, don't feel like you have to be good at everything.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Definitely hire around you if you're not good at something. So
Yeah.
I agree with that. Where can people find out about you?
You can check me out at thataduguy.com. I give away a ton of free info. There's a link to my YouTube channel where I've got 350 plus videos of how we build ADUs for $100 a square foot with examples, tutorials, step-by-steps, ground up, all the way builds. I have a resources page where I give away free sets of plans. We just built 2 ADUs in 90 days and shared the whole process, about 7.5 hours of content. The plans for that front ADU you can actually have for free on my website.
Nice.
And then I'm probably most active on Instagram, and I answer all my own DMs and whatnot. So if you have a question, feel free to shoot it over. A lot of times I'll take questions and I'll post a reel and tag you in it and say, hey, Peter, thanks so much for your question about financing an ADU. This is what I'm doing.
Nice.
Or whatnot. So I'm probably most active there, but you can hit me on thataduguy.com.
Sweet, man. Well, I appreciate your time, dude. You're a knowledgeable guy. You've obviously been doing this for a long time. So I really appreciate the knowledge that you were able to give here today. And you gave some nuggets, especially for people that are either just starting out or having a mental block to do their next deal.
Thank you. Glad to help. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. You have a great day.